Good evening. It's now 6:30, and I call to order the regular meeting of the Victoria City Council. Please join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The first item on our agenda this evening is announcements. Our next workshop will be held on Monday, April 28th from 2 to 6 p.m. at the Victoria Recreation Center in the multipurpose room. During this workshop, the council will discuss its next strategic plan 2025 through 2028, as well as long-term planning for the Victoria Recreation Center. All meetings of the City Council are open to the public and held in the council chambers at City Hall unless otherwise noted. We encourage anyone wanting to attend our council meetings or workshops to register in advance and contact our city clerk. In other announcements, there's an upcoming open house for the Highway West. Let me start again on that. There's an upcoming open house for the Downtown West Highway 5 and 11 improvement project and Highway 11 project on Thursday, March 27th from 5 to 6 p.m. at the Victoria City Hall in the council chambers. Any questions or additional information about this or any of the upcoming transportation-related projects, please visit the city website at victoriamn.gov or contact our city engineer, Kara Guerin. We are also accepting nominations for our Community Builder Award. Each year in June, the city recognizes an individual, group, business, or organization that has, through their outstanding volunteerism or exemplary action, demonstrated an extraordinary commitment to making Victoria a better place today and for the future. Nominations are due by March 31st. Please contact our Communications and Public Engagement Director, Kendra Grawl, with any questions or if you need additional information about the program. That concludes our announcements this evening. There is a proclamation that I will read from the dais, a proclamation recognizing April as National Volunteer Month. Whereas the month of April has been nationally recognized as Volunteer Appreciation Month to honor the hard work, dedication, and passion of volunteers across our nation, and whereas the City of Victoria is grateful for the volunteers who generously dedicate their time and talents to serve our community. And whereas the City of Victoria acknowledges the positive impact that volunteer work has on making Victoria a great community for everyone. And whereas the City of Victoria believes that government alone cannot fulfill all of the community's needs, and we value our partnerships with businesses, faith-based organizations, nonprofit organizations, foundations, as well as individuals and groups who contribute their time, resources, and skill to make a difference. And whereas the City of Victoria is committed to promoting volunteerism and expresses heartfelt thanks to all volunteers in our community for their dedicated service and commitment to improving Victoria. Now, therefore, be it resolved, the City Council of Victoria hereby proclaims April 2025 as Volunteer Appreciation Month. The City of Victoria encourages our residents to recognize the positive impact of volunteerism in our communities. Our next order of business is to adopt the final agenda. Council, can I get a motion to adopt the final agenda?
Move to adopt the final agenda.
We have a motion. Can I get a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. The next item on the agenda is the open forum. This is the opportunity for anyone to address the council on an item that is not on the agenda and not an application form that will be coming to the council at a future date. No one has registered to speak in advance, but if there's anyone in the audience who would like to address the council, please step to the podium and state your name and address for the record. Seeing no one, we'll move on to our next item on the agenda, which is our consent agenda. The consent agenda items are routine, administrative, and do not require deliberation, or are housekeeping items that are required by law. They're approved with one vote unless someone requests an item to be considered separately. Ms. Hardy, does staff wish to pull any consent items for separate discussion and vote this evening?
None from staff, Madam Mayor.
Is there anyone on the council that wishes to pull an item from the consent agenda? Seeing none, any members of the audience wishing to pull an item from the consent agenda for separate discussion and vote? Seeing none, I will entertain a motion for the consent agenda.
Motion to adopt the consent agenda.
We have a motion. Can I get a second? Second. We have a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Now moving on to our regular agenda. Item 6.1 is a variance request for installation of a pool at 6580 Astor Trail. Presenting on this item this evening is Associate Planner Travis Brierly. Mr. Brierly, the floor is yours.
Good evening, Madam Mayor and Council. Tonight's request is specifically for a shoreline setback. The applicants are requesting a variance which would allow for a pool to be installed between their home and Lake Virginia within the shoreline overlay setback. This request is to encroach within the setback 28 feet from the standard 100-foot setback set by our shoreline ordinances. A little bit of background, the application was considered complete back in January of this year. There was a 60-day rule which we extended, so we have 61 days left to make a decision on the application, the city council does before the application expires. We did mail all notices within 350 feet and publish in the paper. We held 2 public hearings with the Planning Commission, one on February 18th as well as one on March 18th. The second public hearing was presented due to new information coming forward after the first public hearing was held. And I will be covering that later in the presentation. Staff has also discussed the application with the DNR, with Carver County, as well as the Minnehaha Watershed District. When we look at an application, we're looking at what's considered practical difficulties is the meat and potatoes of any type of variance application. We want to look specifically if it's a reasonable request. In this case, a pool being a part of a single-family home is a reasonable request in staff's opinion, as there are many pools in single-family properties and it is a permitted use. We also want to look at if a pool is installed on the property, if it would change the essential character of the property or the neighborhood. Again, single-family homes regularly have pools throughout Victoria, so staff does not believe that it would cause any change to the essential character. The final part to that is the uniqueness of the property. In this case, we're looking at the plight of the landowner, plight of the property, a condition that's not caused by the owner but an external condition. When we do look specifically, the parcel that's 6580 Astor Trail was part of a minor subdivision done back in 2014. The layout of the parcel was approved by the city council as well as split back in 2014 into this weird Y shape, but it is a legal parcel. The applicant is proposing a primary location for their pool to be between the lake and the home, and where that red line is across the screen is the 100-foot setback. The applicant has worked alongside a landscaping company, which has provided guidance to the city as well as to the applicant themselves on what would need to be done. There's 4 locations where the pool will go. The first one I want to take a look at is the east option, which is the front yard of the home on the north side of the driveway. That area would not be practical for a pool in staff's opinion due to overstory trees, as well as pools don't generally go into the front yard of single-family homes. We also look at just south of the home, and there's significantly steep slopes. Those slopes would cause for retaining walls to be built, as well as a lot of stormwater mitigation and controls would need to be put in place to make the pool fit there. On the north side of the home, which was one of the areas that staff had proposed for the pool to go prior to the February 18th public hearing, we had learned after the fact that by putting a pool there, there would be more stormwater issues. And that's not a pool the size being requested, which is 18 by 36, but realistically, any type of impediment to the natural or to the graded stormwater on the property would either push that stormwater towards the home or towards the property line and across the property line. Looking on the screen, the blue line demonstrates where the water generally runs from the front yard, and the green lines represent what would happen to the stormwater in a general sense if there's an impediment such as a pool or any other type of fixture. Because of that, there are some challenges to the site that come with that. The last place to look is the west option. This, like I said, this is where they want to put the pool. The entire pool would be beyond the 100-foot setback as indicated by the red line, but it is the flattest area of the property that required the least amount of grading and least amount of stormwater mitigation controls to be built. There is a secondary option that the applicants have proposed to the Planning Commission that has a shorter encroachment, which would only be about 9 feet. The blue box you see on the screen is where they would like to get the pool. That's where their application's for. But there was discussion to actually go just north of that or to the left on the screen that would have the pool only encroaching partway through the setback as indicated by the red line. Part of their application was also 2 other properties that were mentioned that had received variances. The first one to look at is 6642 Astor Trail. That variance was granted by the city in 2023, and it was a deconstruction of a home and the reconstruction of a new home on the similar footprint. The city had worked very closely with the watershed as well as the DNR to make that happen, and there were certain requirements go in there. One thing I would like to point out is that this variance that is cited here did not have a change to the 100-foot setback from the ordinary high water mark. The other variance which the city had issued was in 2024 for 7321 Tamarack Trail. This was a request for the impervious cover on the site. When the homeowners had purchased the property, the pools were not considered an impervious cover, so they didn't go into that hard cover calculation. There was a change to the zoning code afterwards that made it an impervious cover and would go against that calculation. Working with contractors as well as with the DNR, stormwater mitigation controls were brought forward, and the city council had approved a variance to go beyond the 25% impervious cover that was allowed for this site. Just to touch back on practical difficulties from the statute, there's very specific things that the city council should be considering during the process. The biggest part is variances may be granted to the applicant if they can demonstrate practical difficulties. It is on the applicant to show the practical difficulties of the property. When we're looking at that, is the use or is the reason for the variance something that would be normal that you'd see on a property? In this case, we're looking at a line being shifted to allow for a pool, but the primary thing we're looking at is the actual setback line itself. The other thing we need to consider is there's a plight of the landowner due to circumstances that are unique to the property, not created by the landowner. Things such as the shape of the property or where the home was built can be taken in consideration. We're also looking at if it's granted, not altering the essential character or locality. Staff has agreed that it wouldn't, as well as the city council can take a look at the economic considerations, but that shouldn't be the sole purpose of making the decision. When we look at our city code, we're looking at a few specific things. If the variant, or our code specifically states that the commission will not recommend and the council will not grant a variance unless the following facts are presented. One is strict enforcement and interpretation of our code, showing a practical difficulty or undue hardship. The other thing is if there's exceptional or extraordinary circumstances to grant the variance, as well as the variance not creating any adverse effects to the property, the public, and things of that nature, as well as the variance being granted is a permitted use within inside that district. So in this case, pool would be a permitted use within inside our R1 zoning. For the discussion tonight, staff would recommend that the council focus or has some discussion, especially on the 3 items listed. The first one being, is there exceptional or extraordinary circumstances in relation to this application, in relation to the property itself, as far as layout, topography, stormwater, things of that nature. The other thing to look at would be, there any adverse effects if it's granted? Are there other mitigation strategies that we would want to consider if the variance is granted? And the other question that comes up is, should the variance be granted for any amount of encroachment? The applicant's asking for 28 feet. Is that the appropriate amount? Should it be more? Should it be less? That's fully within the city council's purview to make that decision. As well as if the variance is approved, are we looking at the primary or alternate location? And that's where that encroachment would come into place. The last thing would be, is there any other reasonable conditions that the city council would want to consider for the installation? With that being said, I'm more than happy to stand for any questions. Madam Mayor, the council, you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Brierly. The Planning Commission saw this earlier this week, is that correct, or last week?
Correct, Madam Mayor.
And it was the second time in front of the Planning Commission. Can you review what the findings of the Planning Commission were?
Madam Mayor, City Council, absolutely. The first the first public hearing was held on the February 18th Planning Commission. Testimony was provided by the applicants, as well as the landscaper, as well as a neighbor to the applicant, who spoke in favor of the variance being granted. Through discussion of the Planning Commission unanimously voted for a recommendation to the City Council for denial. Prior to that recommendation making its way to the City Council for consideration, the applicant had presented new information regarding the stormwater on the north side of the property and the difficulties that be presented. Staff had a meeting with the applicant as well as the landscaper to learn more about what was going on and get an expert opinion to what could be created and what difficulties would lie ahead. Based on that, we reheld a public hearing during the March 18th Planning Commission meeting where there was a recommendation to the City Council for denial of a vote of 6-1. And tonight is the rest of the information being presented for the council's consideration.
All right, thank you. Council, questions, discussion on this item?
May I comment on the public hearings?
Yes, please.
I had a chance to watch both of them. I did not attend either one of them. The second one, I think, is the most important to focus on at this point in time based on the new information. Watching it, I felt that the numbers 6-1 were swayed a little bit, and it's possible that that could have been a lot closer vote than was done. Again, my feeling from watching it. The second thing is I felt they weren't necessarily voting on practical difficulties and other things. I think they were voting on the fact that it's a luxury item and they were afraid to create any sort of precedent for granting this. And I kept screaming at the computer I was watching it that a variance is not something that can create a precedent. It is something that stands on its own. So I felt that the Planning Commission's discussion and reasons for denial were incorrect.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Other questions, comments?
Are we going to get into a little bit more of the detail on the two options that encroach a little bit? I understand the first one, the 28-foot encroachment, and then the potential second option as the 9-foot encroachment. Are we going to go into any more detail, or is this the time to ask questions about that?
Councilman, I'd be more than happy to go into more detail about those two
All right.
options.
All right, great. Yeah, if you could bring up that.
There we go.
Yeah, perfect. So I guess the property owner's preference is the 28-foot, that's what they initially went after, and then this is an alternative option, the 9-foot encroachment. What are kind of the pros and the cons of the option B, I'll call it?
Absolutely. Madam Mayor, City Council, the pros and cons of the two locations are basically the location itself, between sunlight, between where it fits on the property, a natural look of the property, as well as the stormwater management. With having the pools indicated into the blue area, that's more of a flat area, so your mitigation you need to do to protect the natural resources such as Lake Virginia, they're lessened. By moving the pool to the north or to the left on the screen is going to increase the stormwater mitigation that's going to be needed. However, the trade-off is that it doesn't encroach as far into the setback.
Okay.
I had a chance to tour the parcel last week, and again, from an amateur, there is a lot of trees that would need to come down. There's a lot of landscaping that would need to be done. And from my personal opinion and what I found, it looked like the actual runoff and other options for Plan B would actually be worse for the environment than Plan A.
Councilmember Pedersen, are you saying Plan B is that one that's further left? That's
white one versus the blue one.
Got it, thank you. So we're gonna call that Plan A and Plan B, okay.
Plan white versus Plan B. So that was my opinion on it, and looking at it, it looked like that would be a more detrimental environmental option, if that makes sense.
Thank you. Council, other questions, comments? We did receive a good extensive review and a landscaping plan, and the landscaping and the pool company folks are here with us this evening. And let's talk, can I talk to the landscaping person first? Why don't you go ahead and step forward here? We're gonna need you up by the microphone. And just introduce selves, there's two of you. And you guys are the experts in this, and so I think the big concern that we have here is the protection of the natural resource, which is Lake Virginia. And I understand you guys have done some work around landscaping that can mitigate the damage that could be done to Lake Virginia. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yes, ma'am. I'm Nick Bloom with Outdoor Perfection. This is Jeremy Schultz, my partner and lead designer.
Welcome.
On this property, specifically to what Christian was saying, the part that's out the rear of the house towards the west is the flattest part. So when we had talked to the Stockman family and then the pool company to go further off to the north there, we figured probably around a 225 cubic yard more of disturbance. So we were just doing a average of a foot depth of what we'd have to disturb to go further. Our trail to store materials, all of that kind of stuff, the pool company shifting everything over. So like you said, there's trees that need to come down and all that other stuff too. The area that, when you're really at the home, it is the perfect, it's a very flat spot with one corner, has a little bit of a dip in it. When you go further off to the north is where it becomes a lot more of the disturbance that's needed to kind of get that to the north and tuck back to the east. Along with this proposal that we have up there, all of the brick material, so you guys know, and all of the flat surface is a permeable paver on top of all this. So this isn't concrete with extensive runoff. This is all engineered permeable paver, so they're willing to capture all their stormwater runoff within the area right there. We also have proposed to have all the gutters and the downspouts of everything else in the home captured. So really, if this project did end up taking place, they would, I mean, honestly be in a better position for rain runoff than they are currently right now.
Very good, thank
Yeah.
you. Any other questions or comments for these gentlemen? Perfect, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Council, any other questions?
I have a question for Bob.
Member Pedersen. Attorney Vos.
If we approve this, we are creating a variance on top of our watershed ordinance or our lakeshore ordinance. What kind of risks are we running with being sued by the DNR or the Minnehaha Creek Watershed District?
Yeah, Mayor and Council, and I appreciate the heads up about the question, Council Member, before the meeting. The obvious answer is that when a city is faced with opposition to a variance, the most likely opponent is going to be another landowner, a neighbor or somebody impacted by the land use at issue. And those folks negatively impacted by a variance, in theory, do have the ability to sue a city over that. So that's the typical opponent to a variance that ends up in court. But you're right, state agencies and regional agencies like your watershed have what lawyers call standing. They have the ability also, they have an interest, in other words, in the outcome of a city's decision on a setback variance away from a lake, or in other cases, other things that the DNR has an interest in. They have standing. They have an interest in those issues. And so, yes, in theory, they can sue and have sued cities over the grant of variances that they, the DNR, in this hypothetical, view to not be meritorious or not be legal. So that is theoretically a possibility. I would say that practically speaking, and I don't know if staff wants to speak to it, I think I heard that the DNR was, as I think they're required to be, notified of the request for a variance from a shoreland setback. The DNR, of course, has an umbrella regulatory role over shoreland and shoreland setbacks. They would not be expected to weigh in that way, get involved legally, unless they've already been involved and they've expressed a strong view. on this. I don't know if that's the case or not. I don't know the backstory on that, but it would be somewhat unusual for the DNR to only jump into something like this after, at the very end, after the city's already acted one way or the other on the variance. Normally, they would have weighed in before they continue down the road of legal action. And then just while I've got the mic, the last thing I would just say is that staff's quite right in pointing out the test. You've seen that in a couple of slides. It's important, though, to understand that I think we frequently in zoning law, we think about conditional uses and variances being sort of the same thing, and they're really opposite things. They're the flip side of the same coin maybe, but they are flip sides. A conditional use is something that's permitted. That's something that's allowed under your zoning code, expressly allowed, as long as certain conditions are met. A variance, of course, is something that's not legal, something that is not allowed by your zoning, can only be granted by the city if the applicant proves that they're entitled to it. So the burden shifts. A CUP is something that is entirely up to the city to decide on. It's on the city to disprove, show that a CUP is not warranted. On a variance, it's on the landowner to show that the variance should be or must be granted. So they bear the burden. And I think staff pointed that out in one of the slides.
Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you for that legal lesson, Attorney Vos.
Sure. Cheers.
All right. Council, any other final questions, comments?
I do have a question for
Yeah.
Travis. You state in our background on this, the placement of the home was put close to the setback, and this is a minor subdivision to essentially allow the home to be placed on the parcel itself. And then as a result, this placement was known at the time, and you make the statement that because it's a known factor, it doesn't create a hardship. Is that correct?
Council member, yes. And Mayor and Council, when the applicants had purchased the home was already built and it was already subdivided. Any challenges to the property that existed at the time of purchase, whether known or unknown to the homeowner themselves. So it has been looked at as that's not a plight because those are known conditions. If we were to build something and then after the fact say, hey, we put it in the wrong spot, now we want to move it someplace else, that'd be one thing, but saying we want to leave it and we want an exception to the ordinance and we need a variance for it is another. So it would be up to the city council at the end of the day to determine is the placement of the home, is the subdivision and the shape of the property, does that lot rise to a level that creates practical difficulty for the landowner, in this case specifically the plight.
Councilmember Ebanski, anything else?
I want to get council's view. Encroachments into the shoreland buffer, I mean, these exist for a purpose. They were put in place to protect the waterways. We do already have waterways in the city that are already compromised lakes. Schutz Lake, for example, is on the DNR list of things that is now a lake that's in jeopardy. And so I think it's incumbent upon us when we're looking at these kind of variances to keep that frame of reference and ask ourselves if the variance is something that fits within our criteria, what is being done to reduce the impact with respect to this particular request? Because it clearly will have an impact on the shoreline district. I mean, we're going to put, in large measure, a non-permeable surface into that setback. There is already a boathouse on the property. The length of the shoreland in terms of the lot is a smaller piece than what we're seeing on other properties. So I think that these considerations need to be taken place as to whether, as Travis points out, should we grant variances into these protected zones.
Very good. Council comment?
Yes, I would add it's permitted use within any private property ownership within the city. I believe Councilmember Evansky and I were both part of the group that helped design this ordinance. This ordinance has also received a lot of, we'll call it amendments and possible variances because maybe it wasn't crafted properly. I don't want to get into debating the ordinance itself tonight and if 100 feet is proper, if 75 feet is proper, if the DNR sees this recreational lake as a 100-foot setback or a 75-foot setback location. I just think that the individual property owners should have the right to do something that's permitted, something that will be less impactful than a lot of other things, mitigate a lot of other runoff that could possibly help benefit the lake. I guess I'm kind of for the variance is a legal aspect that we can take to allow them to do this outside of the ordinance. And I'm in favor of private property owners doing what they'd like with the property they've purchased.
Other questions, comments?
Just a comment, I want to make
Councilmember
sure
Wright.
I heard it correctly. I think it was the landscaping company said they'd be in better position after the pool, from the runoff perspective than prior to the pool? Was that from the water capture perspective? Okay, just want to make sure I heard that correctly.
We're getting head nods from the landscaping folks on that for our audience at home. Okay.
Can I ask one other question of staff?
Councilmember Pedersen.
If this was approved as a variance, the next step, would we have a layer of DNR approval that we could put within or Minnehaha Creek Watershed District for granting this variance? So we get through the legal aspect, then it must meet this condition with the DNR, and it must meet that condition. Is there a way that we can do that or not?
Mr. Brierly.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember, when we look at what the DNR's role would be, if the variance is granted by the city council, what that'd be is moving the line. As far as an application for a pool or their plan for what they're doing, that application would then be reviewed by the DNR specifically.
Okay.
One advantage this property has is that the elevation is higher, so the watershed district doesn't get into it.
Okay.
So that's one less layer to do. But when the application comes in, staff is going to review it. Staff is going to look at the impervious cover and compare if there's compliance and there's not, work with the applicant to resolve those, and then make sure that the DNR is aware that an application's come in and allow the applicant to go through the DNR's process on its own. But that would be a requirement and doesn't necessarily need council direction to do that, as it's DNR. It's within the DNR rules for that to happen anyways.
Yeah, thank you.
Councilmember Pedersen, is that clear?
Clear.
Good.
I have a question actually for the landscapers, homeowners. The idea of Plan B, as we're calling it tonight, it would be proposed under that plan that the same stormwater mitigation efforts would be made under that as would be under the initial Plan A of putting all of the improvements within the 100-foot setback, correct? Sure, please.
Please.
Yeah, John Stockman, one of the homeowners. Yes, under Plan B, or the white plan, as we call it, I think the downsides are it does require more grading. It requires a larger retaining wall to be built, or a retaining wall to be built versus the other plan. So those are, you're disrupting that area more by the things, but all the mitigation practices would be the same in Plan B.
Okay, thank you for answering that.
All right, Councilmember Evansky, anything else?
I don't have any other questions.
Right. I think from my perspective, what's really important here for me is the mitigation work that's been done to protect the water. And I feel like you guys have covered all your bases in that. I feel like this property is going to be in a better place following this project than it is currently now. So provided that the DNR gives the nod to this, and I feel like you guys have done a really great job at making sure that you've covered your bases. So thank you for that. I appreciate that. it's not often we see all that kind of great teamwork together, so I appreciate that. All right, any final comments from council? Seeing none, I will then entertain a motion.
I'd make a motion to approve a variance request allowing an encroachment of 28 feet to the zoning ordinance, section 2022-6D, requiring a high water setback from the ordinary high water line for the purpose of installing a pool and patio for the property at 6580 Astor Trail, pending DNR approval.
Thank you, Councilmember Pedersen. We have a motion. Can I get a second?
Second?
I have a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Opposed?
Motion carries. Do you have the dissension noted? Thank you.
Mayor?
Yes.
Just one clarification, I should have jumped in before the vote, but I don't think it's a problem. Just as to the condition, the maker of the motion stated it as conditioned upon approval of DNR permit. I'm not sure that the DNR permit is required here, and so, I think that's reflected in the resolution you've just approved, which says verification that a DNR approval, if it's required, is obtained. So I don't think there is one, but if there is one, I guess you're requiring that it be obtained.
Okay. So do we need to make a friendly?
If that's consistent with what everybody was thinking, I don't need you to take
Okay.
another vote on it. I think that's reflected in the resolution, though, so,
right.
yep.
Very good. Thank you, Attorney Vos. Very good. Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Stockman. You're on to the next step. Next item, 6.2, is a revised sketch plat for the proposed West Creek Village residential development. Presenting this item is City Planner Brian McCann. Mr. McCann, you're up.
Thank you, Mayor and council members. Excuse me. Yes, tonight we do have a revised sketch plat application from Lennar for the West Creek Village site. As you may recall, you reviewed this last August, I believe. Lennar has since made some changes to their sketch plat for consideration this evening. Just as a general note, sketch plat is just to give them initial feedback. You're not making any formal motions or approvals as part of the meeting tonight, so we just want to help guide them if they decide to pursue a preliminary plat application after this. So just a reminder for the location and area, it consists of two parcels, approximately 89 acres in size. They're located north of County Road 10, Angler Boulevard, west of the Marsh Hollow development, and south of the Marsh Lake Hunting Club. Previously, they had shown, I believe, 156 townhomes and 13 single-family homes. This revised sketch plat that you'll be seeing this evening consists of 36 single-family homes, 18 twin homes, and 56 townhomes. For the existing conditions for the site, it's a generally flat, vacant farmland with wetlands throughout the site, as you can see on the screen. Some of those being attributed to West Chaska Creek, which is located on the north side of the site here. So here is the revised sketch plat that was provided. They still retain 13 of the single-family homes on the north side of Creekside Lane here. Those will be those large lots compliant with our shoreland ordinance. And then more single-family along the east side of the north-south road going down to County Road 10. And then adjacent to that is where we have the 56 townhomes on a proposed private road here, as well as some twin homes on the west side of the road. Looking at our comprehensive plan for these areas, they're guided for a blend of low-density residential, which requires 2.25 to 6 units per acre, medium density, which is 6 to 12 units per acre, pockets of open space which generally align with our wetlands that I showed earlier, and then a small portion of commercial on the very south side of the parcel across the railroad tracks, as I'm highlighting here. So the comp plan amendments that would be required for this development to occur, as shown, they'd have to make some alterations to the low and medium density areas here. They would also have to pursue the conservation residential district for those shoreland properties on the north side. And then they would also have to change that small portion of commercial to open space designation since they're encumbered by wetlands. As we look at our comp plan and potential density calculations for what they're proposing, our current existing citywide density is at 3.47 units per acre. You might remember that our 2040 requirement is 3 units per acre, and our 2050 requirement per the Met Council will be 3.5 units per acre. So we're pretty close to that 3.5 right now. We're not quite there yet. Looking at what this development would change for us density-wise, it would reduce it by 0.09 down to 3.36 citywide. The reason for that being is because of that adjustment to the conservation residential. They would have a density of 0.62 units per acre for those 13 single-family homes. The single-family standard lots would meet our minimum 2.25 acre requirement. That area would be about 2.56. The twin homes, which is allowed in a 6 to 12 unit per acre range, they'd be on the higher end, closer to that 12 units with about 11.5. And then the townhomes kind of sitting right in the middle of that range as well with 9.89. And from a map perspective, this is what those comp plan amendments would look like with the conservation residential on the north. Some slight modifications here with the low density and the medium density areas, and then designating this entire chunk down here as open space. So this property is still within Laketown Township, so annexation is still required. When that happens, the property would automatically receive an agricultural zoning per our zoning code. The township has already approved the annexation request from Lennar, so the city council would be the next step when we get to the preliminary plat phase. Regarding rezoning from agricultural, they're proposing PUD with R1 for the single family, and then standard R3 for the twin homes and townhomes. Rezonings are required for all of these items, which are discretionary. So city council has the authority to approve or deny those based on the development that comes in. Since they're requesting a PUD, I thought it would be helpful to pull up our planned unit development process slide again, just to reiterate that it's to allow innovative, creative, and flexible development design. The sketch plat process is where they get the initial input, then they put in the details at preliminary plat, and the final ordinance is adopted at final plat. As we look at their proposed deviations for the single family, they are requesting reductions in our minimum lot width, lot depth, lot area, as well as our front setback, side setback, and an increase in impervious surfacing. For the shoreland lots, they would not have to make any adjustments. These are for those single-family homes on the east side that I showed going on that north-south road. For the R3 twin homes, there's a potential PUD that they might request for the minimum lot width as it relates to the units. The twin homes are 60-foot wide products, if I have that correct, and 50. 25 and 25. So they might request a reduction from 40-foot lot width down to 30 feet or 25 feet, whatever can fit their twin home product in there. And then the townhomes, as they showed them, would meet our standard R3 requirements. Here's some examples of the architecture for the single-family homes that they have that were included with the packet, as well as some of the twin home products. Here, these are the end units for their Liberty townhomes. So what they would do is basically take 2 end units and combine them. If you could picture a twin home as 2 of these or 2 of these, kind of as it's shown here. And then lastly, what was seen at their first sketch plat back in August, their standard Liberty townhome design, which they would incorporate with this development. Moving on to streets and parking, as I mentioned at the beginning, they're proposing a private street for the townhomes. We would like the city council to give staff and the potential developer feedback regarding if they would desire that street to be public or private, or a street width to potentially accommodate any parking. I'll note that the Planning Commission did recommend a 26-foot wide private street during the meeting last week. And then looking at our parking requirements, based on the renderings I just showed you, they would meet all our minimum requirements for single-family, twin home, and townhome parking with those enclosed spaces and the driveway space that they would have. Looking at pedestrian connections, so they do have a 8-foot trail shown on the south side of the development, which would weave down and over to the Marsh Hollow development to the east. They also have a 8-foot trail shown on the south side of Creekside Lane here, extending all the way to the west. Staff also would like feedback from the city council on if a 8-foot trail should be required on the north side for the whole stretch. Planning Commission did note during the meeting last week that they thought a trail between the cul-de-sac and the private drive as shown here with the sidewalk was sufficient, just upgrading that to a trail. And then lastly, the townhome concept is over 3 units per acre, so the city council should decide if they would like sidewalks on both sides of the street for the townhome portions. That was Planning Commission's preference, or if they're comfortable with just the sidewalk on the single side as shown here in the sketch. Looking at landscaping and tree preservation, these are all our standard requirements for R1 and R3 properties that they would have to plan for, including boulevard trees, plantings, buffers, open space. And then there are significant numbers of trees on the site. My understanding is that they will be saving a majority of them, but if they do exceed that 20% removal threshold, they'll have to mitigate any additional trees. And then shoreland overlay, as I mentioned, there is a portion within 300 feet of West Chaska Creek for this site. Those are those larger acreage lots. Those will have to have 25% impervious maximum, 75-foot lot width, and minimum 50% open space. Based on what we've seen, those 13 single-family lots will meet all of these standards. And then parkland dedication. If this development were to move forward, in total, they would have to do just over 2.5 acres of park dedication, or about $271,000 total. That does not exclude the 8-foot trails that they showed, as well as the quarter-acre park that they've proposed with this development as well. So those could be reduced from that amount. And the Parks and Recreation Committee did review this twice. They had a preliminary plat application back in January that was rescinded before Planning Commission City Council review. But when the Parks and Rec Committee reviewed them, they were supportive of cash fee or alternative park dedication. Then looking at Highway 10 access, I'll probably start it and then kick it off to Kara. Our fire department requested gated areas for this emergency access to 10. I think when the city council saw it the first time around, it was potentially proposed to be as an additional access for everyone within this development. That's not the case. This would be for emergency vehicles only. So fire department is requesting gates at both ends to prevent any through traffic. And Carver County has reviewed this and provide some comments, including that the access is removed once development occurs further west of this property.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the City Council. Brian said most everything related to that, but Highway 10 does have adopted by the county, corridor plan for Highway 10 that has limited access planned for it. So in particular for this piece of property and the proximity to the railroad tracks, the county would not allow full access to County Road 10 from this property. So, but given the nature of how many homes we have already constructed off of Creekside Lane with only one access. They understand the concern from an emergency perspective with only having one access. So the county is agreeable to having a temporary emergency access that as development continues to progress to the west, eventually that would be removed.
So Kara, that, where your mouse is right there, that's that temporary access you're talking about?
Correct.
That would be gated and only opened if there was an emergency?
Correct. And the rest of the homes in this development would be accessed via Creekside Lane, so through Marsh Hollow, up over to County Road 11.
And how many homes total are we talking about?
About 100.
So about 100 more homes on that same Creekside.
Correct. And that is, Creekside Lane was designed as a neighborhood collector, is I believe what we ended up calling it. That is intended to be I'm going to call it significant for the city, east-west collector that will serve that part of the city. So they were required to submit a traffic impact analysis that was submitted to the county to take a look at the impact on the intersection of Game Farm Road and Highway 11. All of this development is consistent with what was planned for the South Growth area and part of the comp plan. So unless suddenly you all were proposing to dramatically change the densities from what was in the comprehensive plan, this is consistent with what was planned for the area. The challenge is just the timing. Eventually, as we move to the west, Red Fox is planned to extend from Marsh Lake Road all the way to County Road 10. The completion of Red Fox will depend on the Hunt Club at some point developing, but certainly the south half to Highway 10 would be completed sooner than later, as those landowners would choose to sell their property for development. Of course, it's up to them.
And what does the county have planned for access on County Road 10?
It is limited, so it's mile spacing. So the adopted corridor study, which was adopted in COVID times, so it's like 2020, I want to say. So the city of Victoria did participate in the corridor study, but the city council at the time did not pass a resolution of support for County Road 10. We did not agree with the vision. It really is planned. The best way I would describe it is to be similar to how you would, if you look at Highway 5 through Chanhassen, so like 41 east of 41, that's really, if you wanted to try to get a visual in your mind of how the county views that corridor, in terms of it being a rural section roadway, 4 lanes, 2 lanes in each direction, that is the vision from Highway 11 out to Waconia, with preservation of right-of-way for the potential of a 6-lane intersection at County Road 11. So the city was not in agreement with that vision, particularly between the railroad tracks and County Road 11. At the time, we were so far away from developing this property that it didn't really make a whole lot of sense to engage in a lot of back and forth. They weren't prepared to move forward with a project. This land wasn't annexed into the city yet. We didn't have utilities to the area. So both the county and the city agreed that we would continue to engage in this dialogue for County Road 10 once any of us were in the area. And so that time is becoming imminent now. The county will be releasing a request for proposals for a 2028 project to improve the intersection of 11 and 10 with the primary improvements on 11, so up to the railroad tracks, past the Kwik Trip property. But as part of that RFP, they are going to start looking at preliminary design for Highway 10. So once that work starts, that is going to be the point in time where the city is going to need to re-engage in the discussion of what our vision is for 10, particularly between the tracks and County Road 11, where we have our commercial whatever we call the triangle area, that we had the workshop on. That's going to be the point where we're going to need to really start to dialogue with the county about what the vision is for that section. As we start to move west from the railroad tracks, where we moved into single-family residential and medium-density residential, there was a lot less disagreement with what that access spacing should be. And with our Red Fox north-south collector planned, we didn't have as many challenges there. But County Road 10 is planned to be realigned through a portion of developable property west of here, so that's going to come into play. If the city council starts to consider moving anything ahead of the 2030 property, so the Kuchenmeister property that had come before the council in sketch platform, if the city council decides to start entertaining potential development of that property, that's going to come into play of that additional study that we mentioned, that staff mentioned, that we would have to start to do more work on if we were going to start to entertain land before 2030 in that area.
Okay, thank you.
That was long, sorry. Still me then. Okay, so grading, stormwater management, everything on this parcel is pretty typical. They would need to meet WMO rules, including wetland mitigation. Wetlands, including buffers, need to be located on outlots that will be deeded to the city. Stormwater facilities need to have access. The one thing that's a little bit of a challenge here is along the west side of the property, there is like a tributary to Chaska Creek that runs along the side of it with wetland and wetland buffer that is impacting their ability to extend sewer and water and roadway all the way to the property boundary. So that's going to be something that we're going to have to work through if this project moves forward to preliminary plat. Typically, we do require the developer to build the infrastructure all the way to their boundary, but there's wetland there. And so we've been, when they were potentially moving forward with preliminary plat, we had been working through that with the developers. So that's going to continue to be a challenge that we'll have to work through if they come back forward with a preliminary plat. It's hard to build, you can't really build a road to the middle of a wetland and stop it. So we have to figure out how we're going to work through that challenge. Site utilities, those will get extended for Creekside Lane to the east. We've talked about all of these things before, so no big updates there. I'm going to turn it back to you, but before I do, can you take me back to a slide that has the site layout so I can just talk about public-private streets a little bit? Perfect. Okay, so this loop here is the loop that that we are discussing, whether it should be public or private. And what I did want to note is that this does continue to be an area that the city has not settled on a standard for. Frankly, we're a little bit all over the board with it, as all of these multi-family projects are coming before the city. We've developed a variety pack of circumstances. So Victoria Ridge, the development just south of the railroad tracks, the city council recommended approval and the project was approved with a private street serving the multifamily area with a 24-foot wide street that is privately owned and privately maintained with a pretty narrow roadway. In that case, we ended up obligating the developer to be responsible for the sewer and water services all the way out to the main to address some concerns that staff had with the ability to address a curb stop leak in a very narrow, tight corridor, if you recall. That was just not that long ago that we approved that. The Whispering Hills development, you're all familiar with that development. That is another multifamily neighborhood where we have primarily public streets, and then we have like what we call little finger areas serving the multifamily product. So at some point, we do need to, in my view, come up with a standard that we end up putting into place, so we aren't trying to negotiate these with every developer that comes in the door. And what I can tell you is, even from a staff perspective, there isn't really an easy answer for what the right solution is here. So I don't generally like to speak for the developer, but I am going to note here, originally in the preliminary plat and the concept that you saw previously, they were proposing public streets in this area. And one of the challenges that staff identifies when we're dealing with public streets in this type of scenario, and we talked about it with the Victoria Ridge development, is really snow removal. And the issue isn't a challenge for the city per se. So the city trucks would come through here. If it was a 28-foot wide street, they would come through with their big plow truck. They would run through it like they do your neighborhoods. But with the density, the snow is going to get pushed into everybody's driveway, and off our plow guys are going to go, and they're not going to come back. All of these townhome units, in this circumstance and every other circumstance in the city, the snow removal happens by a private snow removal contractor who's doing all of the driveways. They come in, they clear the snow, and what happens is you have these competing snow removal contractors. You have our big plow truck coming in, and then you have the company for the neighborhood snow removal contractor coming in. Depending on who gets there first, you've got snow getting pushed back and forth, and really the people it becomes the challenge for are the people who live there. And eventually, when they move in, they're your residents and your taxpayers. So we internally, as a staff, are constantly trying to debate what the right answer here is. And unfortunately, I'm not sitting here in front of you today with a recommendation for what staff thinks the right answer is, so we're looking for your input.
Let's talk a little bit about those private roads. I know it's been a bit of a challenge. So the road that's being proposed here on this plan is 24 foot. You mentioned 28 foot is preferred.
So 28 foot is the city standard for a residential street.
Okay.
Now, we've had some discussions in these multi-family areas whether we should be going with a wider street. So if we were to standardize a public street, should we actually be increasing our street width to something like 32, so we have a little bit more room to work? But 28 is our standard residential street in like the streets you all live on.
Okay. And a question for the developer on that. Come on up to the podium here. What impact if we widen that street to say 28 or maybe even 32, what does that do to your project?
Sure. So, good evening, Mayor McMillan. My name's Josh Metzer with Lennar, Minnesota. Happy to be here again. We've been on this project for a while. So, yeah, and this might be new information for city staff as well. It's new information for me, but while we're working through this revised concept plan, we do have our engineer working on revising our preliminary plat set, which, as Brian explained, we were a couple days away from bringing to Planning Commission about a month ago. But based on challenges that staff wasn't comfortable with, they weren't ready to recommend the project for approval, which we thought, well, best to not bring that forward. Let's make some changes, which is why we have this plan here tonight. So our engineer, in reworking some of this for the pre-plat, if this remains a public street, they were able to, and of course this might change as the site fully designs, but right now they were showing 31 off-street parking stalls in the townhome area. So Brian, maybe if you could zoom in on the townhome area. Most of them are located on that central kind of island block, that island there. where the private street swings on the curbs, they've put about 10 stalls on that southern portion, about 17 up around the curve near the park. Now, the tot lot would probably have to get reoriented a little bit from what it's shown here. And then a couple of spots in between buildings on the straightaways on either side of the street there. So I don't know if that would influence staff or council's feeling on whether this were to go private or public. If it were a public street, I don't believe the city allows parking stalls to be loaded off of a public street. So if the parking stalls are desired, it should probably remain private. That, my understanding, would allow for the street to be 24 feet in width, which would prohibit parking on the street. If you wanted the off-street stalls plus on-street parking, the street would need to be at least 26 feet wide if it's private. Hopefully I didn't confuse things more for you.
Yeah, I don't know if everyone else followed that. It was a lot, though, yeah.
Mayor?
Yeah.
Sorry, can I
Attorney
follow up?
Vos.
I'm interested in the private street question mostly here, too. I think maybe what you were alluding to, and for developer reps' benefit, I think you were saying, and I agree, that the question of whether a street is private or not is sort of one thing. The question of the width of the street is another thing. And so theoretically, a street could be built to the city's standard but still be a private street.
True.
And there's some advantage to that in the scenario that plays out all too frequently, where private streets eventually get requested to be public streets again in 10 or 20 or whatever years. And then cities feel like, yeah, we'll take it over, but we want it up to city standards at that point. So, and I think that's what you were alluding to. And so, to the extent the city would require that this be, even if it's a private street, 28 feet or 30 feet, I think the question was, how does that impact your development targets, and is that feasible from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think previously we had a public street shown here, which was 28 feet. Driveways were a little bit tighter in that design. Snow storage was more of a concern, I believe. The wider the street, the more snow you have to plow off, the less area you have to store it. Narrower street, private street, that makes it private, again, the private contractor. And that contractor is the one clearing the street and the driveways. Whereas if it's public, you have the city clearing the street, you have the private clearing the driveways and sidewalks. So I guess there's pluses and minuses to both scenarios.
So if we made this street wider, what I'm hearing is you're going to have to reorient that tot lot a bit, and we'll probably lose some parking.
Right. I mean, we might still be able to get some parking in there, but certainly not the 31 stalls that were shown on the revised plan that I was looking at.
What's required for parking?
Mayor and council members, we do not have a guest parking requirement currently in our multifamily districts. It's something that we would like to incorporate in the future, but it's not a standard we have right now.
Okay.
And each of these homes would have a 2-stall enclosed garage. The driveway would be 2-stall wide, minimum of 25 feet deep from, if it's a private street, from the edge of the curb to the front of the garage door. If it's public, it would be even more than 25.
Okay.
So you can fit, depending on the car, you could fit up to 4 vehicles on a driveway of 5 feet long. Maybe not 4 trucks, but 4 cars.
Okay, thank you. Council, any questions for Mr. Metzer, as long as we've got him here at the podium?
The other point on this too is from that diagram, what were we thinking of for sidewalks on that? In that townhome area?
We had shown on one side.
Yep.
A lot of our townhome communities have no sidewalks if it's private streets. We are showing on one side currently.
Okay.
All right. Council, anything else at this moment?
I think with the density, having it as a private street where the company that's required to remove snow from the streets, also required to move from the driveway, makes sense. My concern is 10 years down the road, when they want to sell the street back to us, what does that look like? So I'm literally torn.
Yeah, we've battled this question with public-private streets quite a bit, and they almost always want the city to take them over again, and they don't meet our standards, and there's some tricky things with that. So I think I'd like to see us do a little bit of work on that, and Ms. Guerin, I understand that there's no easy answers to what a standard street looks like, but we might want to dig into that a little bit too. Can we take a look at the slide where it shows the variances that they're requesting from standard? There we go. So this one in R1, the deviations, going from 12,000 square foot to 5,500 square foot, from 80 feet to 56 feet. That's a lot of deviation, and I'm not sure I'm comfortable with it. So is there things that can be done to make that not so stark?
So what we're doing here is we're pivoting here, right, from 148 townhomes, row townhomes, in a medium density guided area to 111 homes. And with the revised plan, Brian, we do have 37 single family instead of 36. So what we're proposing here is, fewer units by, what is that, 37? And that's actually a mix that we think will work well. The homes that we're proposing are, so it's 56-foot wide lots. It's comparable to the homes over in Marsh Hollow, which are on 51-foot wide lots. So it's a smaller type single-family home. Our row townhomes will be similar in nature to Victoria Ridge and the Marsh Hollow townhomes. So we feel what we're proposing here is matching what's going on in the area. Some of the single-family homes on the north side of Creekside Lane will be served by private streets, similar to what's happening in Hunter's Brook Creekside, immediately adjacent to those. So it's very similar in feel and nature to what's happening in the general area there. So it's also, was intended to be a medium-density area because you have the arterial Highway 10 to the south, you have a railroad corridor, you have commercial guided area to the directly to the east. You have flex employment directly to the east and south. It's an area that obviously it makes sense to be guided for a higher density, which is why the city guided it that way back in, I'm not sure how far back it went to medium density. So that's what we're looking at here. It's not so much that we're looking at it from where we're coming down from a standard large single family lot. That's the standard R1. We're more coming up from a townhome type standard to a single family, maybe a little bit smaller, but that's kind of how we're viewing it.
Okay.
And the 5,500, the actual smallest lot, is 5,672. Again, newer information as our engineers dialing in the lot sizes. So in looking at 37 lots, I did some averaging of lot size and also some impervious surface. I know the impervious is asking for quite a bit there at 50%. So the average lot size of the 37 is 7,108. The largest being 10,800, the smallest being that 5,672. As far as the impervious goes, what I did is I assumed our largest footprint of the homes that will be built in this neighborhood, put that footprint on each lot, plus a 3-car driveway, because these are all 3-car homes, a 3-car wide driveway, and then another 240 square feet extra to play with for a patio or a porch in their backyard. And so the average impervious, if all of those had the largest home placed on them, was 45%. Just one lot was at 51%, but of course, you know, we have smaller homes that we would build there on that lot. Some of the larger lots were coming in at 27% impervious, so really about 45% is where the neighborhood, the single families will land on impervious.
Okay. And then I want to take a look at those proposed models. One of the things that we have heard loud and clear from our residents is single-level living. And these all, if I'm not mistaken, look to be two-story. Do you guys have a product that's single-level living that you would consider putting in this development?
So the part of the transitioning from the previously proposed row townhomes to single family is with row townhomes, you don't have to worry as much about a rear setback and a rear yard because, you know, you're dealing with common lot areas for townhomes. So there was a lot more room depth-wise with our townhomes. Now transitioning to a single family, you have a rear yard of 30 feet minimum that you have to meet, plus the depth of your home, plus a 25-foot front setback. We also have, maybe Brian, if you bring the site plan up, a lot of wetland on the site, and all of the single-family homes are backing up to that large, so that area in green you see, that's one giant wetland. And it comes right up to the rear of those single-family lots. On top of that, you have a buffer area. I forget how deep it is. It's gonna vary, I think, in certain areas, but you have a buffer area that you have to leave natural, untouched, that has to be outlotted outside of the single-family lots. So we're getting pinched already on these. That's why the request for a depth of less than 130 feet, which is the standard. Now, these are probably our shallowest single-family homes, not only because they're smaller square footage, trying to target a lower price point, but because you have a second story, you're able to, include bedrooms, bathrooms, laundry in that upper floor. You go to a single story, that footprint is gonna get probably twice as big. It's gonna get too deep. So the single family product we do have them, but they are just too deep for this part of the neighborhood. We wouldn't be building these if we didn't think we could sell them. We are still building and selling these everywhere, so as much as there are folks that do want that single level living, there are, I would say, an equal number that do want the two-story traditional single family. Now, of course, we are looking elsewhere in the city of Victoria, and we have had discussions about a villa-type product. So that is something that we do have in mind going forward.
Okay.
But for this particular site, not something that is going to be able to fit.
You mentioned a lower price point. Can you give us an idea about what that lower price point
Sure.
is?
So I guess I'll give you the whole thing. So our townhomes, some of those will be, depending on where you're at in the site, some will be a slab on grade with no basement. Those would start at $380. Then others that do have a basement with a walkout, the townhomes themselves will be starting at $400. The twin homes would start at $420. And then the single-family homes, we have starting at $560. So by comparison, Lake Town, I think we were selling at probably the mid sixes to upper sevens.
Okay,
So,
thank you. Council, other questions for Mr. Metzer or any other discussion items on this plat?
Just a comment, I do like the movement you've made on the unit types and the quantity of types, bringing it down and having more single family. Mayor said this as well, the one level would be preferred, but it sounds like you're looking at it in other areas and it's just not feasible here. there's no way in this to do a segment of those units in the single level, like just a smattering of them?
Yeah, there's really not, a community of this size, we're already at 3 types of product. If we add a 4th in there, it gets to be.
Little two, okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
Other questions, comments?
had a-
I'll throw some comments on this.
Councilmember Evansky?
We routinely go back and forth with this side yard setback. We're drifting off topic with this yet again. We're shrinking lot sizes down. I'm not seeing the affordability aspect coming into play for that compromise in the overall package. We have other newer examples that are going up where we requested larger side yard setbacks, we have them, and we have, frankly, more lot for the home that's sitting on it. So when we look at this area, it's more rural, it's more agricultural. This feels like we're just pounding a bunch of housing into a smaller and smaller space, and it's not giving what people come to Victoria for as a housing product. So if we're going to have to amend our comp plan to do this, it still feels like there's some more work to be done. The Planning Commission also brought some very good points in terms of road sizes and sidewalks. And I'm still uncomfortable with the amount of parkland that we're bringing to these spaces, especially in this area. We continue to struggle with the amount of land that we're going to get for those amenities. But I feel that if we're just not working hard enough to get the product that people are accustomed to coming to Victoria for.
If I could,
Please.
can I respond?
Mr. Netzer.
So it's certainly an agricultural field now, but that is going to be changing based on the land guided to the east that I had talked about, commercial, flex employment. I was able to sit in on the work session that council had at the fire hall to discuss the vision for the southern growth area, and there were all sorts of grand visions of major things happening here. And this, site is immediately adjacent to that to the west. So, and it's been guided medium density based on, the access to the site limited to one access. And the densities, the minimum densities that a medium density calls for, the number of units that we were proposing in there just wasn't working with what we needed to get there for a unit count and what the city and city staff needs to provide as far as services and placement of, infrastructure, which is why we're switching to this lower density option. It wouldn't be suitable, in our opinion, to place large lot, single family, immediately adjacent to twin homes and townhomes, especially when the feel of the area on the south side of Creekside Lane is, like I said, in Marsh Hollow, you've got 50-foot wide homes that were approved. The city was comfortable with that. You've got row townhomes in the other portion of Marsh Hollow and Victoria Ridge. We're proposing a similar type product with a mix of private streets and public streets. As far as parkland, with our initial concept plan, we were proposing to offer up that northwest corner, which was, I think, going to be perhaps a 3 or 4 acre public park. The city did not want that. They think they cited proximity to what will be future Marsh Hollow Street, or Marsh Hollow Park, which is the large open area in the Marsh Hollow neighborhood on the south side of Creekside Lane. We are proposing a tot lot and some open space area around it. we're proposing quite a lengthy trail cut across a small upland corridor connecting all the way over to Marsh Hollow to connect up with the Marsh Hollow Trail, which will give folks in the southern end of our neighborhood pedestrian access over to the Marsh Hollow Park. And according to my calculations, I don't think Brian was including the 37 single-family lots that we're now proposing in the parkland dedication. We're also going to be giving near $500,000 in parkland dedication fees. So we've worked this from about every angle that we can, understanding staff, planning commission, and city council's previous comments and feelings on it. And this is what we think makes best for us and for the city as far as how it's guided and the limitations with wetlands and access to the site.
Okay, council, any other? Yeah, Councilmember Roberts.
So, first of all, I guess for me, I would agree with Andy. Like, I do appreciate and like that. Like, it's not that I dislike this layout or anything, and I think you guys have made good progress on it. I think part of it, at least for me, I can't speak for the rest of you, but for me, and I think a lot of residents, there's a little bit of building fatigue, maybe, right? Not that we don't want to build, but there's a little bit, right? We've done a lot of building, and we're starting to see how the south area is starting to develop, right, as more and more goes up. And I don't know, part of me even is like, do we need to have another conversation, a bigger conversation about, like, okay, now that we've done part of this, like, is this the way we want to keep going? Is this what changes need to be made? Do we want to keep plowing ahead with things like this that, in fair, right, like you say, you have similar products to, and you listed, multiple other developments. But that's also part of where the fatigue comes in, right? Yes, it's similar in what we've done in other places, in other areas in that area, but it's starting to feel, right? Like, part of my friend, people didn't move out here for suburbia hell, right? Like, it's because we want something different. And again, it's not that I necessarily dislike what I'm seeing here, but I don't love it. And I think we're to that point where we're like, we need to love it to do it. So that's just my personal feeling. There's a little bit of, it's kind of the same wash, rinse, and repeat.
So if you can help us understand that then, to help us try to
Yep.
plan this. I mean,
Sure.
it's guided medium density.
Yep.
There's very specific
Understood.
density requirements that we have to meet, or
Yep.
we're not gonna get a sanitary permit to build a project. You don't love it, what do you love?
And it's hard to say as someone who doesn't build, right? Like, until I see it, it's hard to say that's what I'm gonna love, right? Like, so we gave feedback. I agree with the mayor with single level living. I get that it doesn't fit here, but again, to my point, maybe it's a bigger discussion that we need to have as a council going forward about, like, is this what we want to keep doing, or no, or do we want to step back, or do we want to do things differently? I get that that's what it's zoned for, right? And so that it's like, I don't know, maybe it's just where my head is at tonight, but
Yeah, well, I understand your point about it looks like every other neighborhood. It looks like every other neighborhood that's in Victoria. And I think one of the things that we sort of pride ourselves on is the fact that every neighborhood has some character and it's unique. And so, maybe that's just the nature of what this is going to be. But I think, Councilmember Roberts brings some good points. And we have to kind of think through where do we want to be with this? And maybe the horse has left the barn on this already, and we can't back up and do something different. But there is something to be said about, how can we do something that doesn't feel like everything else that we've got?
And unfortunately for us, on a site of this size and a guidance and certain zoning regulations that we have to try to meet.
Right. Well, you came, I mean, clearly you came here, we have a set of rules, you followed the rules, and here we are. So, that's not lost, for sure. So, other questions, comments?
I was way down just on parking and street access, and the only thing that I was looking at is the private street. I think it's the right way to go. I think the private street and the snow clearing, all one contract, but the private street to be built at the city minimum. To me, there's not a lot of places to park there, but over the course of time, I feel like that's gonna come back to us. And then I was happy to hear that you had carved out some other spots for public parking, because these people are gonna have parties, they're gonna have friends over, they're gonna have events where you're not gonna be able to park in the driveway. You're gonna have to park someplace. Wider street affords you the ability to park on the street, and then the other access points make sense to me. How big is that marsh area? Is that like 100 yards across? Brian? Gat-
Mayor and council members, that's a good question. At its widest point, yeah, I'd guess about 100 yards.
I mean, to me, that is kind of Victoria. You have a really nice wetland in the backyard that you're not going to get every place else. So while your yard might only be 5,600 square feet, you do have this massive marsh to look at out your backyard. So you actually have this 3 football field size backyard that you get to take a look at for the people with the single family homes. Most of the other things you heard from the planning commission, again, I'm new, I don't hate it, but yeah, it's just a little bit different, being that it's zoned slightly different as well. Got new rules coming into place if we get to keep any rules at all, so, yeah.
Can I ask a question? So I agree with Christian about, to me, with these multifamily housing options, right, it does kind of make sense to have it private. I know there's some issues with that down the road potentially, but having it private, because like we talked about, right, depending on who comes first, you're either gonna get snow back into the street, or you're gonna get snow back into someone's driveway. So I know we've had issues with private roads and then later asking us to take them back over publicly. I mean, obviously we don't have to say yes to that, but is the concern that then they're just not gonna do what they need to do to take care of it, and then we're gonna end up having to fix it again anyways at some point, basically?
If I may.
You please.
So a couple of things. We've taken some back. So I do think that's an important consideration to be mindful of as you're making these decisions. So there is the school of thought of building it to city standard. What I can tell you, when you build it to city standard, it does make it harder for the council to say no. So Garden Path is a good example. They call every 5 years and ask us to take it back, and staff says no. And the reason we say no is because it doesn't meet city standards. I think those roads are 24 feet wide. The setbacks are very narrow, so it would be really challenging for the city to take that one back. So that's resulted in it as a no. I think if you spoke to anybody in their HOA, I think why the question keeps coming up is they're concerned about having enough reserves to deal with those roads. They're the same age as the roads that we're dealing with that have the $10 million price tag for mill and overlays. And so why those questions come up after 20 years is those folks have to figure out how they're gonna pay to maintain that infrastructure, and is the HOA doing a good enough job of building up the reserves that are needed to maintain what's needed to be maintained. So on the Victoria Ridge project, you know, there was specific discussion and some specific language built into the development agreement that was attempting to create some obligation for them to plan for. I can't remember what the final language ended up being that we landed in that development agreement with, that they need to communicate to the city that they are saving for and planning for that eventual maintenance to try to protect everybody against that eventual reality. So in that particular case, the city landed on a 24-foot wide street and then sought to put some protections into the development agreement. And I think they have to report something to us every 5 years that they're planning for the maintenance of the roadway and such, to try to plan for that. But you know, there isn't a right answer. We've looked at what other cities have done. Everybody's doing everything a little bit different. I think if there was an obvious answer, we'd already be doing it. But what we talk about is if it looks like a public street, the people who move in there have expectations that that they're moving into a public street, and as taxpayers, they're expecting the same level of service that you're all getting on your public street. So I tend to prefer it not to be built the exact same way that a residential street is, because then there's no differentiation for people who are buying there. So I tend to prefer some level of deviation, because I think it helps protect you down the road. Makes it easier to say no.
Yeah. Thanks for that. It's helpful.
So not 28 feet.
It's your decision. That's just my perspective.
Well, it's,
20-some years I've been here.
yeah, it's the opposite of mine saying, I think it's gonna happen, and I'm setting up future councils to be able to take it back. But perhaps a better way to go about it is to build it not to city specs, so the upcoming council can't take it back.
Now, I will say, we build it to city standard from a pavement section perspective to make sure it lasts as long as all of the other roads that you build. But look and feel, you know, Mark Kultzis, the city's senior consultant, who's been around as long as I have, a lot of those roadways in the Marsh Hollow development, where you'll see like the 6 and 12 units type design, he's a big proponent of that for the private streets for multifamily, because they're really narrow. They really are more like an alleyway. So they are private. They don't look like a public street, and that's part of that protection. But we do standardize what the design is to make sure that they last as long.
You're
for
talking
those
about
residents.
road rather than road.
Correct, yeah. So that it lasts the same, it gets the same service life that a public street would.
Just the width.
Okay, very good. Any final comments, thoughts, questions? Okay, there's no official action. Yeah,
Yes,
please.
you know, I guess a question. It is guided medium density. If there's trouble with the deviations we're requesting, if we came back with a townhome project that met the R3 standards to a T, had private streets, the way Mark Kultzis had referred to them in the comment letter, imagine Madeline Trail, if you will, if you're familiar with Madeline Trail. We could build something like that that would meet R3 standards. What we're trying to do here is something a little different, a little bit more creative, a little bit more unique. But there is a path to go to meet R3 standards, but in our opinion is a much less inviting neighborhood to live in. Is that something that would?
That's a good question.
Just trying to look for
Yep.
a path forward for
Yep,
us.
and that's a good question. Let's roll back to that R3. Can you kind of walk us through what that might look like with this plan? Is it more single-family homes,
No, it would be
more townhomes?
townhomes on the south, and perhaps, maybe Brian, if you could go to the existing land use map.
One moment.
Talk amongst yourselves while we load.
Wheels spin. It's getting there.
Because, you know, the people that I report to are they're gonna wanna come forward with something at a preliminary plat level. Trying to, at this point, I feel like we're gonna be left guessing. And I don't want that.
Mayor and council members, if I could jump in for.
Please, Ms. Hardy.
So, thank you. I've been just jotting down some notes as we've gone along, and I'd like to take a minute to kind of summarize what I feel I'm hearing from the consensus of the council. And then as you're thinking through these things and thinking through next steps, I think, as you know, we have a multidisciplinary team that works on these projects daily and are very good at what they do. They're very creative. And so one thing that you might want to direct us to do is, if I've captured this correctly, to go back and work with Josh and his team, maybe using the lens of what we gathered here tonight to relook at things and see if we can move something forward from there. So as you're noodling that, I'll just take a moment to capture what I feel like I've heard. And I think some of the comments that were made here, and I feel like I saw some head nods, that every neighborhood is unique. That as we go through Victoria, one of the things that we really feel that sets our community apart from other suburban communities is that we use those, and I'm going to throw in some words here, but those natural landscapes, the things, the landscape to add some character and individuality to each of those neighborhoods. And so I feel like there was some consensus that with what you were seeing here, that that might be lacking. And so that may or may not be the case. So maybe there's an opportunity for us to just go through and look at this layout and see how those natural features could be amplified or enhanced as part of this project. I think there was some really good discussion on private streets, and so and I think it feels like that there might be some consensus to continue to explore the private streets, and I think I was just seeing consensus that if we do end up going that route, to make sure that they do look different. If not, if we're going to go the public street route or a private street, that if it looks like a public, then maybe we want to consider doing something that we did previously within that development agreement, just making sure that there's, we'll just say, money in the coffers for if and when the city would be asked to take that back. That we can do those improvements without spreading that out to the other tax base. Also, I was hearing some consensus about the townhome area, including parking for guests. And it feels like that could be incorporated. I think there was also some discussion about recognizing the movement and the appreciation for the diversity in the products here. And while we still would prefer single level living, that the challenges with this particular land might not fit here. And so I just want to take a minute to check in to make sure that you're comfortable with us proceeding with the products that you've seen here tonight, or if that's something that we should still explore. And then, and I did also see some head nods with the suggestion with, maybe this kind of comes back to that first thing that I noted, the marsh being an amenity, potentially. So is there an opportunity to really make that connection as that marshy area being connected to the neighborhood as a unique characteristic? So I know in the past that we've talked about making sure that the Madeline Trail, for example, the side yard setbacks, and we had some of that conversation tonight, being just the problems with the soil, the challenges that we have with our clay soils here with drainage, that just becomes problematic for us. So I think I saw some head nods here with those side yard setbacks, some concern when we're mushing that together and putting things in these soils closer together, that creates some problems. I certainly don't want to put words in the council's mouth, but that Madeline Trail example, I think historically has been something we've learned from that, and that's not something we want to repeat. But I will pause there to make sure that I've captured your thoughts and where the consensus is correctly.
Yep.
And would offer again that staff would be happy to go back and work with the team.
Yeah, I think, I think you summarized it nicely. We've got this picture up now. Josh, if you want to take a look and kind of talk through what you're thinking here.
Sure. And I guess before I do get to that point, Dana, thank you for bringing up natural features. That's something I guess I should have pointed out and didn't. Councilmember Pedersen, you did allude to it, that, all but 6 of the single-family homes do back up to the large marsh to the east. Part of what we like about this layout with the townhomes and twin homes is almost all of them back up to some sort of open space and some privacy. Whereas some townhome communities, you'll see the buildings backed right up to each other, where if you're on your back patio, you've got your neighbor across the way on their back patio, 50 feet from you. What you're getting here is quite a bit more privacy than you would normally have in a typical townhome community. To the west, you have Chaska Creek that runs along the west property line. So that's another natural buffer there. Yes, in the future, there will be likely some residential development to the west, but it will be kept at a distance by the presence of the creek there. The area north of Creekside Lane, I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but there's probably close to 11 acres, I think, that are being put in conservation. It's a mix of wetlands, wooded upland, and open space upland. So I know it's hard to look at these things from a two-dimensional black and white perspective and really get a feel for it. But I hope there's, some validity in some of the things that we think are positives of this neighborhood. Pedestrian connection, walkability, trying to preserve some open space, give some privacy to some of these folks when they get home at night to go to their back patio and
And I think that is a benefit. That's unique, it's a benefit. It helps in a neighborhood like this.
And I think you're more on the right track with this than you are with your other option that you said, just putting a whole bunch of townhomes.
I would agree.
Right?
I would agree.
I think that would be going the wrong way.
because I think the only route we had to go to not be kicked to a PUD, to not have to go through a comp plan amendment, at least for everything south of Creekside Lane. For the north, we will have to because it's too sensitive an area. In order to meet low density requirements, you'd have to blow up trees and wetlands. But to the south, the other option was to lay it out like a Madeline Trail, where you have a public street running down the middle and little feeder private streets feeding off to 12 units, 6 and 6 off of each of those private streets. And you'd end up with just rows of townhomes.
Can you talk about like the difference in what the side, like this inside square footage, so not comparing the townhomes to your twin homes?
So
They kind of look, similar-ish.
It's basically our townhomes. If you took the interior units out and slapped those two end units together,
Okay, it's the same.
that's it. So square footage wise, let me pull that up. So talking on an individual unit basis, You're gonna have anywhere from 1,700 to 1,850 in total square footage. That's with a basement. No, I take that back. With a finished basement, some of these will be up around 2,500 square feet. 3 bedrooms up. If you finish the basement, there's a bedroom down, so it could be 3 to 4 bedrooms. 2.5 to 3.5 bathrooms, depending again on whether it has a basement and if that basement's finished. 2-stall garage. The garage, yeah. And again, it's the twin homes will be the same type of unit as the townhomes, except the number of buildings or number of units in that building.
Okay. Very good. I think we'll let staff continue to kind of work and help see if we can tweak that a little bit, maybe give us a little bit more elbow room in those setbacks and see what else we can come up with as far as maybe working on that private road. And
Ask one question about the products before we
Yeah,
wrap.
Councilmember.
We go to the next slide. The other slide. I mean, I raised 3 kids with a 2-car garage. Can we knock off the top and maybe make the garage into more of a single level living family type of an arrangement? If we go with a smaller yard, maybe a smaller home. Again, I'm not an engineer, I'm not an architect, but it seems to me like you could make a more livable, smaller plot, 2-car garage type of a setup. Would just be my input, and maybe you can't, but
And we certainly have a 2-car product. I mean, we have all the way down to a 25-foot wide product.
okay, well, you just made a comment earlier regarding the fact that you couldn't get enough space, and to me, it's like, I don't know how big one of the garages is, what, 150 square, no, it's probably more than that, call it 300 square feet, there's a living room. I don't know, just an idea.
Yeah, and we just don't have a product that's wider and shallower. I think is what
Okay.
we're getting at. Yeah, we don't have that.
And Josh, do you have a product that is like the townhomes that are at Pioneer Trail and Bavaria Road, tucked in by the railroad tracks, over by McKnight?
Yeah, right across Pioneer Vista, I think we're calling it.
I'm not exactly sure of the name, but you know,
Kind of kitty corner from the church.
I would say this is essentially like once you come out of the first roundabout, cross railroad tracks, and then there's the town
Off to the right.
before
Going.
the second before you hit the second roundabout. So it's nestled along the train tracks.
Yep.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. We don't have something that is exactly like that. What we are proposing to build here is if you went down Pioneer Trail to the other end of the golf course, right at the curve there, right where your cursor is. Those are the same townhome we would be building here. So you would be able to, if you wanted to take a drive and get a
That's
look.
Clover Ridge, is that what you're?
It's Pioneer Vista. The road, yeah, Clover Ridge.
Clover Ridge, but it's Pioneer Vista, is
Yeah, you get right on Pioneer Trail. and it's-
I'm not in love with what you have for the product for the townhouses. So, and especially given that if you have a taller product, you can probably maybe get vistas of the wetland that you're talking about that the single-family houses are backing up to.
A taller product?
I mean, the ones that are off McKnight, I think they're a taller product. And it feels like the garages are kind of more tucked in an alley as opposed to just facing the street.
Oh, the ones right.
We
Oh,
did
those.
used to have a product like that. It's expensive to build, which means it's expensive to sell, which is why we got away from that one.
Well, I mean, if you're asking for like what we like in terms of feel, I mean, that's more aligned with, I think if we're gonna go into density.
Have that on one side, single-family lower across the street. Everybody gets to see the
Everybody
swamp.
gets to see what,
The wetland.
Wetland, I'm sorry.
The wetland. It's not a swamp, it's a wetland. Okay. All right,
we'll affectionately refer to as a mark.
okay. All right. Thank you so much, Josh, appreciate it. Thank you. Continue to work with staff, we'll see if we can get there. This was discussion, so no official action is needed. So, Brian, you good? Thank you, Dana, for capturing those thoughts. So at this point, there are no more items on our regular agenda, so we're going to move on to reports and emerging issues. Attorney Vos, you're up first.
No, thank you, Mayor. I don't have anything to report.
Ms. Hardy, anything from staff?
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. Just a quick note for anybody watching us at home or on demand that there will be a number of closures coming up for the various transportation improvement projects that will be kicking off here at the end of the month. So we encourage everyone to pay attention, follow the detours, and please follow the county, and if not, the city. While the county is taking the lead on the communication, we're kind of reposting as quickly as that information becomes available, so our residents and visitors to our community remain informed.
Very good, thank you so much. Council, any reports from council this evening? All right, seeing none, there are no more items to come before the body this afternoon, so I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
We have a motion, can I get a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. We stand adjourned.